They called me a brave, graceful widow. They praised my strength as I stood by my husband's polished casket, a vision in respectful black. What they didn't see was the ghost of a smile I saved for the moment the lid closed. A smile for the secret we would both take to our graves. His, much sooner than expected. His name was Julian. To the world, he was a titan of industry, a philanthropist with a dazzling smile and a perfect, photogenic wife me. At home, he was a sculptor and I was his marble. He carved his anger into my skin with fists and his contempt into my soul with words. A misplaced word could earn a backhand. A disapproving look could mean a shove into a doorframe. He was careful, always. Bruises were placed where silk could hide them. Cuts were explained away as accidents in my clumsy gardening. The night it began, the real beginning started like all the others. We were hosting a fundraiser at our home. I was his beautiful prop, circulating with a tray of champagne, my smile a practiced, placid mask. My ribs ached from the hug he'd given me too tightly in the kitchen, a silent warning to be perfect. I was talking to his business partner, Marcus, when I felt Julian's gaze. It was a physical weight, a cold spot between my shoulder blades. I'd lingered too long. My laugh had been a decibel too genuine. I excused myself and went to the patio for air, my hands trembling. He followed me. The French doors clicked shut, muffling the party's din. "Enjoying your little chat, Elara?" he asked, his voice a low, pleasant purr for anyone who might be watching from inside. His hand settled on my waist, fingers digging into the fresh bruise beneath my dress. "He was just talking about the quarterly reports, Julian," I said, my voice steady, a miracle. "He was looking at you," his grip tightened. "And you were looking back." He maneuvered me against the stone balustrade, his body shielding his actions from the house. His hand, the one holding his drink, casually tipped the ice-cold champagne down the back of my dress. I gasped, the shock a visceral jolt. "You're too warm," he whispered, his lips near my ear, a grotesque parody of intimacy. "Cool down. And when our guests leave, we'll discuss your lack of discretion." He walked back inside, leaving me shivering and humiliated. I clutched the balustrade, my knuckles white. My fingers brushed against the single strand of pearls at my throat, a gift he'd given me after the last discussion. A peace offering that felt like a collar. In my anger, I yanked at them. The string snapped. Pearls clattered on the flagstones, a sound like tiny, scattered bones. I knelt, frantically gathering them, my vision blurring with hot, helpless tears. One pearl, flawed with a small, brown blemish, rolled into a crack in the stone. I left it there. A tiny rebellion. Later, after the last guest had left and the silence of the house became a predator, the discussion began. It was in his study, a room that smelled of leather and his sharp, expensive cologne. He didn't use his fists this time. He used words. "You are nothing without me, Elara. A pretty, empty vase. I filled you. I made you, your art, dabbling. Your friends? Parasites. No one will ever want you. No one will ever believe you." He backed me toward the fireplace. His words a relentless hammer on the fragile shell of my spirit. My heel caught on the ornate rug. I stumbled, my head connecting with the marble mantelpiece. The world didn't go black. It shattered into 1,000 blinding, pain-filled shards. Then, nothing. I woke up in a hospital bed. The light was too bright. My head throbbed with a rhythmic, nauseating agony. Julian was there, holding my hand, his face a masterpiece of concerned devotion. "Oh, darling, you gave us such a scare," he crooned, smoothing my hair back from my forehead. His touch made my skin crawl. "You fainted at the party. The doctor says you're severely anemic. You need to take better care of yourself." The lie was so smooth, so effortless. He'd brought me here, the hero, the doting husband. He had crafted the narrative already, and I was just a character in his story. A nurse came in, her smile warm and pitying. "You're a lucky woman, Mrs. Thorne. Your husband was so worried. He carried you right in." Julian squeezed my hand, his thumb pressing down on a hidden, yellowing bruise on my wrist. A silent reminder. I own this story. I own you. I looked at the nurse, at her genuine sympathy. I looked at Julian, at the cold triumph in his eyes, disguised as love. And in that moment, something in me broke. Not into smaller pieces, but into something new. Something harder, sharper. The doctor confirmed the anemia diagnosis. But as he was leaving, he paused. "We did a full blood panel, Mrs. Thorne. It's standard. We'll have the full results in a day or two." Julian nodded, already disinterested. But I saw it. A flicker in the doctor's eyes. A hesitation. He knew, he might not have known the specifics, but he saw the dissonance. The perfect husband, the perpetually injured wife. It was the first crack in Julian's flawless facade. A tiny, hairline fracture. And I knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was the only one who could widen it. As they discharged me, the doctor handed me his card, his gaze lingering a second too long. "Call me if you have any questions about your results." The doctor's card felt like a live wire in my palm. I tucked it into my clutch, my movement slow. drugged from the painkillers and the thrumming in my skull. Julian's arm was around me, a possessive band of steel. As he guided me out of the hospital and into the sterile morning light, he was talking, his voice a smooth, confident stream about rescheduling meetings, about getting me home to rest. I wasn't listening. I was replaying the doctor's look, the unspoken question. Questions about your results, not symptoms. Results. In the car, the silence was a third passenger. Julian drove with one hand on the wheel, the other reaching over to pat my knee. A patronizing, calming gesture. You need to be more careful, Elara. I can't have you falling apart on me. I turned my head to look out the window, watching the city blare past. Falling apart. Is that what he called it when he slammed my head into a mantelpiece? A collapse of structural integrity? I felt the ghost of that impact, a dull echo behind my eyes. But beneath the pain, a new emotion was crystallizing. Not fear. Not sadness. It was a cold, clear fury. He installed me on the white sofa in our living room, a pristine cage, and went to his study to make calls. I sat, perfectly still, a doll propped up for display. My gaze drifted to the patio doors, to the crack in the flagstone where I'd left the flawed pearl. A tiny, buried secret. My first. The next few days were a study in quiet unraveling. Julian was working from home, which meant he was watching me. His presence was a constant pressure, a hawk monitoring a wounded mouse. I performed my part. I drank the nutrient shakes the doctor ordered. I napped when told. I was the picture of convalescence. But inside, the gears were turning. I started noticing things I'd been too cowed to see before. The way he always placed his phone face down. The password-protected Excel sheets he thought I didn't know about on his laptop. The way he'd sometimes take calls in the garden, his back to the house, his voice a low, urgent murmur. Business, he'd say. Always business. My breaking point, the point of no return, came on the third day. He'd received a package, a new smartwatch, the latest model. He was sensing it to his phone, fiddling with the settings at the kitchen island. It has a fantastic fall detection feature, he said, not looking at me, and a continuous heart rate monitor. So if you ever faint again, it will alert me immediately. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. He wasn't just monitoring me, he was weaponizing his concern. He was building a digital cage to complement the physical one. He was going to use technology to corroborate his lies, to paint himself ever more firmly as the savior of his fragile, sickly wife. He finished setting it up and went to take a shower, leaving his old watch on the counter. An analog, expensive thing. It was a risk, a terrible risk. But the cold fury inside me was louder than the fear. I picked it up. The metal was still warm from his skin. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird. I inspected the back, the winding crown, nothing. Then I noticed it. A tiny, almost imperceptible seam along the edge of the face. It wasn't part of the design. Using my fingernail, I pried at it. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the entire watch face popped open. It was a lidded compartment. And inside, nestled against the mechanics of the watch, was a micro SD card. My hands didn't shake. The pain in my head receded to a distant hum. This was it. The proof. It had to be. Why else would he hide it like this? I slid the card out, a sliver of plastic no bigger than my thumbnail. It felt heavy with promise. With damnation. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced my calm. I looked around. Where? I needed to hide it. My eyes landed on the small, decorative pot of a fake orchid on the windowsill. I plunged my fingers into the plastic soil, buried the card, and smoothed the pellets back into place. I had just closed the watch face and set it back on the counter when Julian walked in, a towel around his waist, his hair damp. Everything all right, darling? He asked, his eyes scanning me, the room. Just getting some water, I said, my voice miraculously even. I turned to the sink, filling a glass, feeling his gaze on my back. He picked up his watch, strapped it on. He didn't check the secret compartment. He had no reason to. I was just his clumsy, anemic wife. But I was no longer that woman. The woman who accepted her narrative. I had a piece of his. A tiny, digital shard of his truth. That night, I waited until his breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet silent on the cold floor. I went to the kitchen and retrieved the micro SD card from its hiding place. I took it to the old laptop I used for my digital art, a machine he never touched, and inserted it into a reader. The folder that opened was labeled Z_archive. Inside were dozens of video files. My blood ran cold. What had I found? Evidence of his affairs? I'd suspected them, of course. But this felt different. I clicked on the most recent file. It wasn't an affair. It was a recording from a hidden camera in his study. The timestamp was from the night of the fundraiser. It showed my back as I faced him. It showed him advancing on me. It showed me stumbling, my head hitting the mantelpiece, my body slumping to the floor. He had recorded it. He had recorded everything, but why a trophy? Blackmail against me? Then the audio kicked in. After I fell, he didn't call for help. He walked over to my limp body. He leaned down and his voice, clear and calm, whispered into the microphone. Subject 3. Impact-induced loss of consciousness. Note the efficacy of a controlled environment versus a spontaneous altercation. The public pretense appears to heighten the subsequent psychological disorientation. He wasn't just an abuser. He was a researcher. I was not his wife. I was his subject 3. The words echoed in the silent, dark room, a grotesque label that stripped me of my name, my humanity. I sat in the glow of the laptop screen, the cold from the floor seeping up into my bones. On the video, Julian was now calmly checking my pulse, making notes on his phone, the clinical detachment more violating than any rage. I scrolled through the other files. They were all meticulously named. S3_kitchen_verbal_devaluation. S3_gala_public_humiliation. S3_post_event_gaslighting_session. There were dozens. A log of my torment. A case study. My stomach churned. I stumbled to the bathroom and vomited, the bitter taste of bile and betrayal filling my mouth. I gripped the cool porcelain, my body trembling not with fear but with a soul-deep revulsion. He wasn't just hurting me. He was studying me. My pain, my fear, my breaking points, they were data points. For what? I went back to the laptop, my movements robotic. I had to know. I navigated out of the S3 folder. There were others. S1. S2. My breath hitched. I wasn't the first. With a trembling click, I opened S1. The folder contained similar videos, but the woman was different. Blonde, younger. I recognized her. Isabella. His first wife. The one who had, according to Julian, tragically taken her own life after a long battle with depression. The videos told a different story. They showed a similar pattern: isolation, psychological warfare, escalating violence. The last file was titled S1_termination_self-administered. The video showed him handing her a bottle of pills, his voice a soothing, poisonous murmur. "It will stop the pain, Bella. It's the only way." He hadn't killed her. He had convinced her to do it herself. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. I was going to be sick again. Isabella. Sweet, fragile Isabella. We'd met a few times at charity events before he'd whisked her away to protect her fragile mental health. We'd shared a quiet moment once and she'd looked at me with such profound sadness. I'd thought it was her depression. Now I knew it was a warning. I opened S2. Another woman. A business associate from a few years back, a brilliant lawyer named Chloe who had suddenly left the country after a nervous breakdown. The video showed Julian systematically destroying her professional reputation, planting evidence of incompetence, all while posing as her sole supporter. S_termination_professional_ruin. He had broken her not with his fists but with her own ambition. I was subject 3. The physical specimen. He was refining his methods, expanding his variables. He wasn't just a monster. He was a sociopath conducting a longitudinal study on how to break a human spirit. For what? The thrill? The power? Or was there a larger, more terrifying purpose? The scope of his betrayal was oceanic. It wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. We were his lab rats. And his experiment required a conclusion. Termination. My termination was already being written. The anemia, the fainting spells. He was setting the stage. A tragic, sudden illness. Or perhaps, like Isabella, a desperate, final act to escape the pain he was so meticulously documenting. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the laptop. My eyes were wide, hollowed out with horror. But deep within them, a new light was burning. Cold. Focused. The grief, the fear, the self-pity, they evaporated, leaving behind a core of pure, glacial resolve. Julian thought he was the scientist. But I was about to become the variable he never calculated. I made a decision then, a chillingly calm one. I would not run. I would not hide. I would finish his experiment for him. I would give him his data. I would show him exactly what happens when Subject 3 becomes self-aware. I copied the entire contents of the SD card onto a secure cloud drive he didn't know I had access to. Then, I carefully wiped any trace of my activity from the laptop. I returned the micro SD card to its hiding place in his watch. He could not suspect a thing. The environment had to remain controlled. The next morning, I was the perfect wife. I made his favorite coffee. I asked about his day. I wore a high-necked sweater to hide the fading yellow and purple on my throat. "You seem better, Elara," he remarked, sipping his coffee, his eyes appraising me. "The rest did me good," I said, smiling softly. "And the new medication the doctor called in seems to be helping." He froze, his cup halfway to his mouth. "Medication? What medication?" A tiny fissure. I kept my smile placid. "Oh, he called last night, after you were asleep. Said the full blood panel showed a severe B12 deficiency. He's sending a prescription to the pharmacy. Said it should clear up the fainting spells entirely. It was a lie, a test. The doctor had called and no such thing." I was probing his defenses. Julian's face went through a fascinating series of micro-expressions: surprise, irritation, and then a forced, smooth control. "You should have woken me. You looked so peaceful," I said, my tone light. It was just a quick message. He studied me, his scientist's mind looking for the anomaly in his subject's behavior. I met his gaze, my eyes clear and guileless. I was no longer the scared woman in the video. I was an actress playing her, and I was giving the performance of my life. He finally nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. "Good. I'm glad you're feeling better," but I saw the calculation in his eyes. My recovery was an unexpected data point. It would force him to adjust his hypothesis. It would force him to escalate his methods. And escalation required mistakes. I was counting on it. The architect of my own revenge, I worked in the silent spaces he never noticed. My canvas was the life he had built for us. And my brush was the persona he had created for me, the fragile, decorative wife. It was the perfect camouflage. My first move was precision itself. I needed an ally, but I couldn't risk a direct approach. I remembered the doctor's card, the one I tucked into my clutch at the hospital. Dr. Reese Thorne. No relation, a coincidence Julian had once found amusing. I created a new, encrypted email account. From a public library computer 10 miles from our house, I sent a single message. "Drive. Thorne, you expressed concern about my results. My environment is not safe for a conversation. My husband records everything. If you are willing to help, leave a copy of the Emperor of All Maladies on the passenger seat of your car, parked in the hospital's west lot, tomorrow. I will know." It was a risk. He could dismiss it as paranoia. He could call Julian. He could call the police. The next day, I told Julian I needed fresh air and was going for a short, slow walk around the block. He barely looked up from his financial charts. I drove to the hospital's west lot. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I scanned the rows, and there it was, a blue sedan. On the passenger seat, clearly visible through the window, was the thick, distinctive spine of the book I'd named. A sob of relief caught in my throat. I hadn't realized how alone I'd felt until I wasn't entirely alone anymore. I didn't approach the car. I didn't make contact. The signal was enough. A thread, gossamer thin, had been cast. My next project was Julian himself. I began a campaign of subtle, psychological warfare, tailored specifically to his ego and his obsession with control. I started leaving small, unsettling traces of myself that didn't fit his narrative. I'd hum a tune he didn't recognize, something complex and classical, when I thought he was listening. I'd leave a book of advanced physics on my nightstand, a subject he'd always told me was beyond my artistic mind. I'd correct a minor historical fact he got wrong during a dinner with colleagues, my voice gentle, my smile innocent. "Actually, darling, I think you'll find that was 1742, not 1738. He'd stare at me, a flicker of confusion and irritation in his eyes. His data was becoming corrupted. His subject was acting unpredictable. I also began studying him with the same clinical detachment he used on me. I noted the single glass of whiskey he allowed himself each night. I noted his tells, the slight tap of his index finger when he was lying, the way his nostrils flared just before he lost his temper. I learned the rhythm of his life, the unshakable routines of a controlling man. His morning swim, his 10 a.m. conference call, his weekly business dinner every Thursday. It was during one of these observations that I found my weapon. Not a knife or a gun, but a prescription. In his bathroom cabinet, tucked behind a stack of towels, was a bottle of propranolol, a beta blocker he took for mild, performance anxiety-related high blood pressure. The label warned in bold letters, "Do not consume alcohol. May cause dizziness, drowsiness, and severely low blood pressure." A plan, cold and perfect, began to assemble itself in my mind. It was a house of cards, requiring every piece to fall in exactly the right order. It required access to his whiskey, a knowledge of his schedule, and a storm. The weather forecast obliged. A severe thunderstorm was predicted for Thursday night. His night out. The trap was set. That Thursday, I was a vision of domestic serenity. I kissed him goodbye at the door. "Have a good dinner, darling." The moment his car disappeared down the drive, I moved. I put on gloves. I went to his study and took the hidden SD card from his watch, slotting it into the reader. I fast-forwarded through the videos of my abuse until I found the perfect clip, a clear, damning sequence of him backhanding me, his face a mask of rage. I edited out the sound, leaving only the brutal, silent imagery. I saved it to a separate, ordinary USB drive. Then, I went to the wet bar. I took his favorite crystal decanter of Macallan. Using a small syringe, I extracted precisely 40 milliliters of whiskey. Then, I crushed 4 of his propranolol tablets into a fine, white powder, dissolved it in a tiny amount of water and injected it back into the decanter, swirling it gently. The alcohol would mask any slight grittiness. The dosage was a calculation enough to cause severe hypotension, not enough to be easily detected on a tox screen. It would mimic the symptoms of a sudden, catastrophic stroke. I returned the decanter to its exact position. I wiped everything down. I put the USB drive in my pocket. I was an architect, a chemist, a director. I was building his finale. He came home late, smelling of rain and expensive steak. Rough night, he grumbled, heading straight for the wet bar. My blood turned to ice. This was it. I heard the clink of crystal. I stood in the doorway, watching as he took a long swallow of the poison whiskey. Everything all right? I asked, my voice soft. He turned, his eyes already looking slightly unfocused. Boardroom politics boring. He took another sip. You wouldn't understand. He finished the glass and poured another at the double. The storm outside raged, wind lashing the windows. Perfect. He swayed slightly, putting a hand on the bar to steady himself. Feeling lightheaded, he slurred. Maybe you should sit down, I said, not moving to help him. He stumbled toward his favorite armchair, collapsing into it. His face was pale. Elara, I don't. His words were thick, his breathing becoming labored. I walked over to him, standing just out of reach. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and held it up. Do you know what this is, Julian? I asked, my voice calm, devoid of emotion. It's your life's work. The conclusion of your experiment. His eyes, wide with confusion and the first flicker of primal fear, tried to focus on me. He tried to speak, but only a choked gasp came out. The data is conclusive, I whispered, leaning close so he could hear me over the storm. The subject has terminated the experiment. His hand twitched, reaching for me, but he didn't have the strength. He slumped forward in the chair, unconscious. I didn't call an ambulance, not yet. I first went to the wet bar and meticulously washed the decanter and his glass, destroying the evidence. I returned the SD card to its hiding place in his watch. I made the scene pristine. Then and only then, I picked up the phone. My voice was a masterpiece of panicked tears. Please help. It's my husband. I think he's had a stroke. As the paramedics burst in, I slipped the USB drive into the pocket of Marcus, his business partner, who had arrived just behind them. The chaos was a symphony the first had composed. Paramedics, their uniforms dark with rain, swarmed around Julian's still form. Their shouted medical jargon, BP 70/40, GCS 3, was the percussion section. My own performance, the terrified wife clutching her robe at the throat, was the haunting melody. Marcus, Julian's partner, stood frozen in the doorway, his face ashen. I made sure our eyes met. I let him see my terror, my helplessness, as they loaded Julian onto the gurney. I stumbled against Marcus, a calculated, frail movement. My hand brushed his overcoat pocket. The USB drive was now his. In the ambulance, holding Julian's cold, limp hand, I felt nothing. Not triumph. Not remorse. A hollow, resonant silence. The monster was felled, but the battle had transformed the victor into something else. I had become the calm, calculating force he believed only he could be. I had used his own body as a weapon. The line was not just crossed, it was erased. At the hospital, the narrative solidified exactly as I'd engineered it. Acute hypotensive crisis, the ER doctor told me, his expression grim. Brought on by severe stress and possible interaction with his blood pressure medication. We'll need to run tests, but it looks like a catastrophic stroke. I nodded, the picture of shell-shocked comprehension. He's been under so much pressure at work, I whispered, laying the groundwork. He never knew when to stop. They admitted him to the ICU. He was alive, but the damage was extensive. The doctor used words like significant neurological deficit and guarded prognosis. The man who sought to control everything had lost command of his own body. I called the necessary people from his phone, my voice breaking at all the right moments. I was the grieving wife, already in mourning. The first domino had fallen with a satisfying, silent click. The second domino fell 2 days later. I was at home, pretending to sort through Julian's papers for insurance documents, when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Meet me. The usual place, 1 hour. M. Marcus. The bait had been taken. The usual place was a quiet, members-only club where he and Julian often conducted off-the-books business. I walked in, my black dress a statement of recent tragedy. He was waiting in a secluded leather booth, a whiskey already in front of him. His hands were shaking. He didn't speak. He simply slid the USB drive across the polished table. What is this, Marcus? I asked, my voice a careful blend of confusion and exhaustion. Just watch it, he said, his voice gravelly. On something that isn't connected to any network you own. I palmed the drive, my heart a steady, cold drum. What's on it? He drained his whiskey, the ice cubes clinking like shattered teeth. Your husband. The man he really was. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine pity in his eyes. Elara, I had no idea. I swear to God, I didn't know. I allowed a single, perfect tear to trace a path down my cheek. What do you mean? He was documenting it. All of it. Marcus's face was sickened. I thought he was just a hard ass. A ruthless businessman. I knew he could be cruel, but this was pathological. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. There are other files on there. References to other women. Isabella, Chloe, I let the silence hang between us, heavy with implication. I was the victim. He was the horrified witness. The script was perfect. Why are you showing me this? I whispered. Because the board was going to force him out next week, Marcus said, his gaze intense. We found discrepancies. Millions funneled into a private research foundation. We thought it was embezzlement. Now, I think it was for this. He gestured to the drive in my hand as if it were a venomous snake. With him incapacitated, the vote is a formality. I'll be named interim CEO. I can protect you, Elara. I can make sure you're taken care of. But this, he shook his head. If this gets out, the company is finished. Everything we built. The scandal, he was scared. Not for me. For the Empire. For his share of the gold. I looked down at the drive in my hand, then back at him, my eyes wide and innocent. What should I do with it? Keep it, he said, his voice urgent. Lock it away. It's your insurance. If anything suspicious happens to you, your lawyer releases it. But for God's sake, keep it quiet. For everyone's sake, I nodded slowly as if absorbing the weight of his counsel. For everyone's sake, I repeated. He paid the bill and left, a man who believed he had just contained a crisis. He saw a broken widow with a powerful secret. He didn't see the architect. I sat there for a long time, finishing my water. I had wanted Julian's empire to crumble. I had wanted his partner to know the monster he'd enabled. I had achieved both. So why did I feel so empty? I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. I saw a woman who could poison her husband, manipulate his partner, and play the grieving saint without a flicker of genuine emotion. I had wanted to escape his control, but in doing so, I had harnessed his darkest methods. I had become what I hated. A researcher of human weakness. A master of calculated consequences. The victory was complete, and it tasted like ashes. The hollow victory was a seed. And from it, a colder, more determined resolve grew. Julian was gone, but his system remained. The company that funded his research, the board that turned a blind eye, the society that celebrated him, they were all complicit. My revenge was no longer just about Julian. It was about dismantling the machine that created him. The news of Julian's devastating stroke was a carefully managed press release. The narrative of the hardworking CEO brought down by the pressures of his empire was too poetic for the media to resist. My public silence was interpreted as dignified grief. Privately, I began phase 2. I reached out to Dr. Thorne again through our encrypted channel. This time, I attached a single file, the silent video of Julian striking me. The subject line was simple: hypothesis, systemic complicity. His response came within an hour. The data is compelling. What is your required outcome? My fingers flew across the keyboard. Not a scandal. An autopsy of the entire structure. I had a doctor on the inside. Now I needed a lawyer. But not just any lawyer. I needed the one person who had already escaped Julian's machine. It took me a week to find Chloe. She was living under her mother's maiden name in a small town in Portugal, teaching English online. When I finally reached her on a secure video call, her face, once sharp and ambitious, was gaunt with a permanent wariness. Elara, she said, her voice thin. If this is some kind of trick. It's no trick, Chloe. I didn't mince words. I told her everything. About the abuse. The SD card. The S2 folder. About his experiment. As I spoke, her digital facade crumbled. The tough, unflappable lawyer I remembered dissolved into a raw, trembling woman. He ruined me, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. He made everyone think I was incompetent, unstable. I lost everything. I know, I said, my voice soft but firm. And I have the evidence to prove it. All of it. I want to take down the foundation he used to fund his work. I want to expose the board that enabled him. But I can't do it alone. I need your legal mind. She was silent for a long time, staring at her hands. What's in it for you? The same thing that's in it for you, I said. To watch the whole damn thing burn, a slow, grim smile touched her lips. It was the first real emotion I'd seen on her face. Send me the files, with Chloe's brilliant, vengeful mind guiding the legal strategy, and Dr. Thorne providing a sworn affidavit about his medical suspicions and the research implications. We became a trinity of retribution. The execution was a thing of brutal, cinematic beauty. It unfolded in waves. Wave 1, an anonymous data packet delivered to every major financial news outlet. It contained the financial records of Julian's research foundation, showing millions funneled from Thorn Industries with board members' tacit approval. The headline was Inevitable Philanthropy or Fraud. Thorn Industries CEO funded secret project before devastating stroke. The stock began to plummet. Wave 2, Chloe from Portugal filed a massive wrongful termination and defamation lawsuit against Thorn Industries, citing a hostile, manipulative, and psychologically abusive environment fostered by Julian Thorn. She didn't name me, but her suit referenced corroborating evidence from a primary source within the Thorn residence. The board was now in a panic. Marcus called me daily, his voice increasingly strained. Elara, you have to make a statement. Deny these allegations. This Chloe woman is a lunatic, but the press is eating it up. I'm in mourning, Marcus, I said. My voice a fragile thread. I can't deal with this right now. I could almost feel his frustration radiating through the phone. Wave 3, this was the most satisfying. I didn't release the violent videos. That would have been too crude, too easily dismissed as a personal tragedy. Instead, I leaked the audio. Cold, clinical audio of Julian's notes. Subject 3 shows increased resilience to public humiliation, requiring a shift to private, physical reinforcement. *S1's termination was efficient, but the self-administered method lacked the controlled data collection of a medical event. The audio was played on news channels, the disembodied, monstrous voice of the celebrated CEO discussing the systematic destruction of women, as if they were lab rats. The public turned. The hero was a predator. The collateral damage was immense. Innocent employees saw their retirement accounts evaporate as the stock crashed. The company's charity wing, which had done genuine good, was tainted forever. I felt a pang for them, a sharp, guilty thorn in my side. But I pressed on. You cannot dismantle a castle without scattering the stones. The final blow came from Marcus. Desperate to save the company, he moved to have Julian declared mentally incompetent, using the leaked audio as proof, thereby voiding any of his controlling shares and allowing the board to seize control. It was a cutthroat business decision, the kind Julian would have admired. He called to inform me, expecting my gratitude. It's the only way to save the company, Elara. We'll take care of you, I promise. I was standing on the patio, looking at the crack where the flawed pearl was buried. I know you will, Marcus, I said softly. Because you know what happens if you don't. The line went so quiet I could hear his breath catch. He understood. The widow wasn't just grieving. She was the holder of the keys to hell, and she was not afraid to use them. I had one. The empire was in ruins. Julian's name was mud. His life's work was exposed as a monstrous fraud. I should have felt triumphant. I had avenged myself, Isabella and Chloe. But as I looked out at the perfectly manicured garden, the hollow feeling returned, wider and deeper than before. I had become the puppet master of ruin. I had orchestrated a symphony of destruction, and the silence after the final note was deafening. The day the company filed for bankruptcy, a single unmarked envelope arrived for me. Inside was a photograph of Isabella, smiling, with 2 words scrawled on the back, "Thank you." The photograph of Isabella was a ghost at the feast of my victory. Her smiling face, the handwritten thank you, it wasn't a comfort. It was an indictment. It made my revenge real in a way the crashing stock price or Marcus's frantic calls never had. Another human being, a victim like me, was acknowledging what I'd done. I had become her avenging angel. The weight of that role was crushing. The hospital called. Julian had developed pneumonia. It's often a complication in cases like his, the nurse said, her voice professionally sympathetic. Given his prognosis, we need to discuss moving to comfort care measures, comfort care, a gentle term for the end. I went to see him. I hadn't visited since the day he was admitted. The ICU room was a landscape of beeping machines and sterile smells. He was a shrunken version of himself, tubes snaking from his nose and mouth, his eyes closed. The powerful, terrifying man was reduced to a biological process slowly shutting down. I stood by his bed, alone with the man I had murdered. The moral high ground I'd pretended to occupy evaporated. I hadn't acted in self-defense in that moment. I had executed a plan. I had chosen to become a killer. The cold, calculating architect now had to face her creation. "I know you can hear me, Julian," I said, my voice low and steady in the humming quiet. "The doctors say some cognitive function might remain." His finger twitched. A tiny, almost imperceptible spasm. "A data point. The company is gone," I continued, leaning closer. "Your foundation is exposed. The world knows what you did to Isabella, to Chloe, to me. You're not a brilliant scientist. You're a footnote in a true crime documentary." I watched the heart rate monitor. A slight elevation, he heard. He understood. "I did it," I whispered, the confession tasting like poison and power. "I put the propranolol in your whiskey. I used your own weakness against you. You spent your life trying to prove you could control everything, especially the women you saw as beneath you. And in the end, it was one of those women who ended you. The data, as you'd say, is conclusive. The beeping of the monitor became more rapid. A spike of rage or fear from the ruined fortress of his mind. This was the reckoning I thought I wanted. To look my monster in the eye and tell him I had won. But the victory felt like acid in my veins. I saw the flicker of my reflection in the dark screen of a medical monitor. A woman in black, standing over the bed of a helpless man, whispering truths that were also weapons. The image was uncomfortably familiar. It was a darkened version of him standing over me. I had become the controlled, clinical one. The unfeeling observer. I had wanted to escape being his subject. But in mastering his methods, had I simply become a more advanced version of him? The door to the room opened softly. Dr. Thorne stood there, not in his white coat, but in a simple sweater and slacks. He didn't look surprised to see me. The nurses said you were here, he said, his voice quiet. He glanced at Julian, then back at me, his gaze knowing. It's almost over. Is it? I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. It wasn't about Julian's life. It was about mine. Maurice Thorne walked closer. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply stood beside me, a witness. I read the lawsuit filing, Chloe's. You gave her life back. I destroyed a lot of innocent lives in the process, I said, staring at Julian's still form. The employees, their pensions, a system that protects a man like him needs to be destroyed, he replied, his voice firm. Innocents get hurt in earthquakes, too. It doesn't mean the earthquake was wrong. It means the ground was built on a fault line. His words were a bomb and a brand. They justified my actions but also cemented their terrible finality. He looked at me, his eyes deep and serious. What he did to you, Elara, it wasn't just abuse. It was a violation of your entire being. Your response wasn't just revenge. It was a reclamation, a reclamation. Was that what this was? Had I taken back my life, or had I simply carved out the parts he had broken and replaced them with something cold and hard and just as monstrous? I looked back at Julian. The heart rate monitor had settled into a slower, more erratic rhythm. The fight was gone. The fear was gone. There was nothing left but the slow, mechanical sigh of the ventilator. This was the final confrontation. Not with him, but with myself. I had faced my abuser and told him the truth. Now I had to face the truth of what I had done. I had killed a man. I had destroyed a corporation. I had become a force of nature. And I would have to live with that forever. What do I do now? I whispered, the architect lost in the ruins of her own design. Maurice didn't answer. He just waited. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the single, flawed pearl I had retrieved from the patio crack. I held it in my palm, this symbol of my first, tiny rebellion. Then, I closed my fingers around it. The heart monitor let out a long, continuous tone. The line was flat. Julian was gone. The sound of his death was not an ending. It was the beginning of a silence I knew would last forever. They buried Julian Thorne on a Tuesday. It was a small, private affair. The media circus had moved on to fresher scandals. I stood by the grave, a black veil hiding my face, playing my part one last time. Marcus was there, avoiding my eyes. He was CEO of a hollowed-out shell, and he knew I held the sword of Damocles over his head. He would ensure I was financially secure for life. It wasn't care. It was fear. As they lowered the casket, I didn't throw in a handful of dirt. I dropped the flawed pearl into the grave. A final, silent offering. A piece of my broken self, buried with him. A week later, a formal envelope arrived. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter regarding the dissolution of the Alexander Foundation Julian's research fund. As part of the winding-up process, they were contacting all listed beneficiaries and contributors. Attached was a complete donor list. My breath caught in my throat. I scanned the names of the wealthy, gullible donors Julian had swindled. And then I saw it. A name that made the world tilt on its axis. Dr. Maurice Thorne. He wasn't just my sympathetic doctor. He was a contributor. A significant one. The room spun. The memory of him in the hospital room, his words of justification, a reclamation, took on a new, horrifying meaning. Had he been helping me out of compassion? Or had he been using me as a tool to destroy the man who had misused his donation? Had he been protecting his own reputation, ensuring the truth of what his money funded never saw the light of day? I had thought I was the architect. But had I just been another subject in a larger experiment? A more efficient, self-motivating weapon? The irony was a knife in my heart. I had trusted the one person who seemed to see me, only to discover he had his own agenda, his own secrets. The betrayal was different from Julian's. It was intellectual, not physical, but it cut just as deep. I had never truly escaped being a pawn. I didn't confront him. What would be the point? To scream, to cry? It would be undignified. And I was now a woman who valued control above all else. Instead, I packed a single bag. I left the pristine, empty house with its ghosts and its hidden cameras. I left the city. I used the money from Marcus to buy a small, isolated cottage on a rugged stretch of coastline. The weather here was wild and unpredictable, a reflection of my inner world. I am writing this from that cottage. The wind is howling and the sea is a churning, gray expanse. There are no answers here, only the constant, roaring questions. I am free. Julian is dead. His empire is dust. I have all the money and safety I could ever want. And I am haunted, not by Julian's ghost. I am haunted by my own. By the woman I was, the woman I became, and the woman I am now, a widow. A murderer, a savior. A destroyer. I am all these things, and the weight of them is a constant, crushing presence. I think of Isabella's photograph. Her thank you, I hope she has found some peace. I think of Chloe, who is rebuilding her life in Portugal, her name finally cleared. I helped them. That has to count for something. But then I think of the anonymous employees, the shattered lives and the collateral damage of my war. And I think of Reese Thorne, and the chilling possibility that my entire journey of empowerment was just another man's strategic play. There is no clean ending. No moral. Just the aftermath. I take the pearl from my pocket. I had a matching one made into a pendant, a permanent reminder of my flaw, my strength. I hold it in my palm, its surface cool and smooth. I am a brave, graceful widow. They praised my strength as I stood by my husband's polished casket. What they didn't see was the ghost of a smile I saved for the moment the lid closed. A smile for the secret we would both take to our graves. His, in the cold, quiet earth. Mine, in the howling, endless wind. They called me a survivor, but no one ever asks what the storm leaves behind.